I'm Elex Michaelson. This week, the issue is heat and power.
Well, let me give you some facts.
We pressed Governor Gavin Newsom on how the lights stayed on this week, nuclear power in California, and more. Plus, an exclusive one-on-one with U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg on the billions coming to California, a new way to complain about the airlines, and how fatherhood changed him. Then,
the generous reception we have had everywhere since our arrival in California.
behind the scenes of Queen Elizabeth's 10-day trip to California in 1983 with Melissa Giller from the Reagan Presidential Institute. The Issue Is starts right now.
Broadcasting across California, you're watching The Issue Is.
And welcome to The Issue Is. I'm Elex Michaelson. Anyone who lived in California in the early part of this century remembers rolling blackouts when the state shut off the power on purpose because the grid was so overwhelmed. They were so unpopular. They were a big reason why then Governor Gray Davis was recalled. Well, this week, the current governor was able to avoid them, in part due to technology that didn't exist back then.
This has been historic, unprecedented, record-breaking week.
Governor Gavin Newsom says California was about to implement rolling blackouts when they tried something new, sending out this emergency message to cell phones statewide, urging people to conserve immediately. It worked. Can you talk about the decision to send that message out and the danger of doing that too often as well?
Well, 27 million of those text messages went out. And within 45 minutes, we saw roughly 2,600 megawatt reduction in usage. Had that not happened, we would have had some episodic load reduction.
Bloomberg put out this graph showing the drop in energy use after that message. The governor says his staff had debated for days whether or not to use the message.
The challenge is, you're right, you overuse that, it begins to dilute itself. And so I'm hoping we don't have to do that again. If we do that again, please take it seriously. We don't do that lightly.
California recently passed a record $54 billion in climate spending and extended the life of California's last nuclear power plant, Diablo Canyon, until at least 2030. But the state has no plans for any new nuclear plants.
There's no doubt that next generation nuclear is very exciting and very safe.
U.S. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm making the case on The Issue Is. Sounds like your advice to California might be take another look at this issue.
They might want to take a look at it. I mean, if I were here, I would.
She encouraged California to rethink maybe adding more nuclear. Any thought of that?
Well, look, we've been reaching 100% electricity on a pretty consistent basis in the state. We've run days where we're at 100% already. The question is capturing that electricity and storing it during those off-peak hours. You scale your battery storage, that's not necessary in terms of the approach that we've taken.
Newsom says keeping Diablo Canyon open allows for experimentation with other green tech.
We will stress test them in the extremes, and we won't turn Diablo off until we know that we are out on the other side of that.
California recently announced a ban on all gas-powered car sales by 2035. But during this week's record heat wave, the state asked electric car users to not charge during peak hours, causing some critics to wonder whether the grid will be ready by 2035.
Well, let me give you some facts.
Newsom says right now, electric vehicles charging currently represents only 0.4% of stress on the state's electric grid.
We project 4% when we completely accelerate to 2035 in the entire grid. Meanwhile, we're stacking unprecedented new resources on top of that over the course of the next decade and a half.
Our thanks to Governor Newsom. We spoke to him in Beverly Hills outside a conference that drew newsmakers from around the country. Among them, the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. There he is on stage talking with Kara Swisher. He also headed to Hollywood.
Thank you both so much for being here. Thanks for coming. Secretary Pete.
There's Buttigieg with James Corden on The Late Late Show, but his official work focused on infrastructure. We caught up with him in the Inland Empire.
The project again.
U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg visits a park in Fontana, which is receiving a $15 million grant from President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure bill. That money will build a walkway for thousands of students and improve roadways.
This is why we fought so hard to get that law through.
During this California trip, Buttigieg also announcing grants at a subway in San Francisco with the House Speaker and at LA's port, where LA's mayor describes them this way.
Again, let's give a round of applause to our great
Sugar Daddy from Washington, D.C.
California alone set to receive $28.2 billion to fix roads and bridges, $10.3 billion for public transit, $1.5 billion to fix airports, and $384 million to build EV chargers. While in the Inland Empire, the Secretary joined us for an exclusive interview. Mr. Secretary, welcome back to The Issue Is. This has got to be fun for you going around the country and giving out money. Mayor Eric Garcetti described you as the sugar daddy for the country going around. You feel kind of like Oprah, like you get a car, you get a car, you get a car. What's this process like?
Yeah, I mean, what's exciting about this is, it's one thing to look at a piece of legislation, look at a spreadsheet, look at a PowerPoint and see what these dollars could do. It's another to look at the highway, look at the bridge, look at the port, and stand with the local community leaders, expressing what it means to them to be able to solve a specific problem with these federal dollars. Sometimes the problem is a bridge in such bad shape that emergency vehicles aren't allowed to go over it. Sometimes the problem is, like we saw in the port yesterday, an area where trucks can't really get to the containers that they need to. Sometimes the problem, like here in Fontana, includes students having to walk along a highway, literally, to get to school, and we can bring solutions to that. I think that's why there was such support for this infrastructure package. It's why we had Republicans joining Democrats, at least some of them, to help us get it done, and now to actually be able to get on the ground, see the work, and support it in a very direct way. It's exactly why I think I've got the best job in federal government.
Another thing you've worked on recently that impacts people in a pretty profound way is rules for traveling. So many complaints about what's happening with the airlines. You on the transportation website actually now have sort of the rules of the road. How can people access this? How does this impact people in a real way when they're traveling?
Yeah, so I think all of us have experienced the frustration of trying to get to where you're going and the airline isn't ready, you get canceled or you get delayed, and you don't even know what to expect when you're in that situation because you can't get somebody on the phone. I've experienced this not just as a policymaker, but as a passenger who's on an airliner just about every other day. And we know that if we push harder, we'll get results. So we're doing three things at once. We're enforcing the rules that are there, finding airlines that don't refund passengers when they should, for example. Second, we're updating the rules, raising the bar on what is expected of airlines. The third thing we're doing, and it's actually been one of the most powerful, is transparency. We announced that we're going to put together a website where you could just find in one easy place how different airlines will treat people according to their customer service plans. The day we said we were going to set up that website, 0 out of the top 10 airlines, for example, committed in writing to providing hotel or meal vouchers for you when you get delayed and it's their fault. And we said, look, 2 weeks, we're going to put this website up. Within less than 2 weeks, we had 8 or 9 of the airlines doing that. So sometimes that transparency, that sunshine can do as much as some of the other enforcement actions that we're doing. We're going to keep advancing both in order to get results.
So people can go to transportation.gov to look at that, and they also can file a complaint if the airlines aren't doing the right thing.
That's right. We have a consumer protection website. Look it up, your rights as a passenger, on our DOT website. You can get the information about what airlines should do, and if they're not doing it, you can file a complaint and we will follow up. We have your back as a passenger, and we will hold airlines accountable for doing what they're supposed to when it comes to things like refunds or taking care of passengers when they get stuck.
You know, as a transportation secretary, also we move from the planes to now the cars. Here in California, recently announced that by 2035, all vehicles that are new, that are sold, have to be electric vehicles or can't be gas-powered vehicles. What do you think about that? And is that something that could be a national model?
Well, it's interesting to see how the states are trying to go above and beyond what we're doing at the federal level. And I'm really interested to follow these developments while we continue to set a national policy that's the baseline for all of this. We need to move in the direction of electric vehicles. And look, industry's already there. At least one major automaker says they're not even planning to make gas cars past 2035. But we've got to make sure that this happens quickly enough to help us beat climate change. We've got to make sure it happens affordably enough that it's not just wealthy people, but low-income people who are the ones who most need those gas savings if they can afford the EVs in the first place. And we need to make sure that this is a made-in-America EV revolution. And this country that has such a proud tradition of automaking, it's exciting to see kind of 100 years after cars exploded onto the scene in the first place, see how that EV revolution is going to accelerate.
In the meantime, most people still driving gas-powered powered cars. Gas prices, obviously, one of the most important issues for so many people. We've seen it go down now for several months. Where are we headed in terms of gas prices?
So we're going to keep pushing, first of all, to seek to have gas prices go down, and secondly, to have fuel economy go up. Americans are already saving billions of dollars because of the fuel economy standards that our department maintains. It started in the 70s, and we keep ratcheting it up to make sure that you can go further on a tank of gas, so you don't have to fill up as often. And when you do fill up, we want that to be affordable. The president's taken a lot of actions that I think are part of the reason why we've seen gas prices go down every day this summer. We're going to keep pushing.
I'll wrap things up because you are bringing rain. You are the shaman. We've been in a drought for 6 months, so not only you bring infrastructure funds, you're bringing rain. But just we know we've talked to you about your kids. Just had a birthday. What's the biggest surprise so far of fatherhood? And talk a little bit about life in Michigan too, because you moved to Michigan. Why that decision and what that's like?
Yeah, we're in Michigan because the kids' grandparents are there, and as every parent knows, when you can turn to your parents or in-laws to help out, that makes a huge difference from a child care perspective. And of course, it's where Chasten grew up. Look, like every proud parent, we're delighted and so thankful that our one-year-old twins are happy and are healthy. I think the biggest thing we found as parents is not only do you discover what it means for children to depend so completely on you, you find out how much you as a parent depend on others, the proverbial village that it takes to raise a child, your friends, your family, who are there for you when you need that help, whether it's something really serious like the hospitalizations that we went through early on with our kids, or something as simple as figuring out what to do when you're running late from work and somebody's got to pick up the kid from daycare. And we're so blessed to have a great support network with friends and family, and we're working, of course, back on the policy side to make it a little easier for all working parents to afford to be the parents they want to be. And part of that is something is, just to bring it back to transportation, something as straightforward as making sure your commute's a little shorter so you get more time with the kids that you love.
Even in the rain, you're on message. Thank you very much for bringing the money and the water. We appreciate it.
We get blamed for enough stuff we don't do. I guess I'll take credit for
the rainmaker, Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Great to see you, and great to have you back in SoCal. Thank you. Yeah, the fact that we had a few seconds of rain might have been more newsworthy than anything that he said. It was quite something to have that for a few seconds. Our thanks to the Secretary. Up next, new insights into the Queen's historic visit to California and her unique dynamic with Ronald Reagan. But first, the Above Los Angeles Instagram account takes us above Torrance. We'll be right back.
We are very grateful for your charming hospitality and for the generous reception we have had everywhere since our arrival in California.
That's in 1983. Queen Elizabeth II came to the West Coast for a memorable 10-day trip. There she is in San Francisco with President Reagan. She visited California cities up and down the coast, including San Diego, Palm Springs, Yosemite. Here's the Queen inside the California legislature in Sacramento, asking various lawmakers about how our system works. We want to show you now the Queen inside LA City Hall with then LA Mayor Tom Bradley as her guide. But her guide for most of that trip was the then President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, who knew a thing or two about this state. Joining us now is Melissa Giller. She is the Chief Marketing Officer for the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute based at the Reagan Library in Simi Valley. Melissa, welcome to The Issue Is, and it's amazing you're joining us from the Oval Office.
Thanks for having me.
You win in terms of perhaps best Zoom background. And of course, if you go to the Reagan Library, you can see that for yourself. Melissa,
sure
if you would, take us behind the scenes of this trip, which was unusually rainy for California. Of course, we're in the middle of a drought right now, but at that point, they were not.
That's right. So in June of 1982, the Queen and Prince Philip hosted President and Mrs. Reagan at Windsor. And so President and Mrs. Reagan wanted to return the favor. And in February and March of 1983, they came out for a 10-day trip to the West Coast. They were supposed to do the entire thing on their yacht, the Britannia. And as you said, this was not a drought. There was such torrential downpour that they couldn't even get into the ports on their yacht. So the President and Mrs. Reagan first hosted the Queen and Prince Philip at Rancho del Cielo in the Santa Ynez Mountains, and she had a fly-in clear to the nearest airport, and then drive the 7 miles up the very muddy, windy road. They almost didn't make it. And when they finally got there, the president apologized, to the Queen, "I'm so sorry." And she said, "Oh, it was an adventure," which really was her personality, I think, which is why the president enjoyed her company so much. But then a couple days later, on the President and Mrs. Reagan's wedding anniversary, the Queen did host them on the Britannia and actually gave them a wedding anniversary gift, which they cherish and is actually on display here in the private quarters of the Reagan Library.
What was the gift?
A silver engraved box with their names and the date of their meeting.
Oh, very cool. Of course, Her Majesty met with 13 U.S. presidents, but it's obvious she was especially close with President Reagan. Some of the reporting says that he was really her favorite. Can you give us some insight into their personal dynamic? Because they wrote to each other as well.
So, yes, President Reagan loved to write everyone, every diplomatic leader, members of Congress, the general public. He loved to write letters, and the Queen did write back. They had a great relationship. The president called her delightful, warm, charming, caring. He wrote these things in his personal diaries, in his autobiography. He talks about them. He says one of his favorite memories of his presidency was landing in a helicopter at Windsor to meet the Queen. Of all the things he could choose, that's what he chose. They had a very personable relationship. It wasn't just diplomatic in nature. They formed a friendship that really lasted the whole time they knew each other.
All right, they did eventually get onto the yacht for a little while during that trip. And we found some video, which I don't think you've even seen yet, which is from her yacht. This is where President Reagan wants some decaf coffee. And we all get to be like a fly on the wall. So listen into how this works. This is like the Queen, but for real.
Do you have any decaffeinated coffee?
It's just coming through. John says it'll bring it through.
Thank you. It's coming.
Oh, well.
I mean, we try our best. It's coming.
She takes control there. It's like it's
that
like
might be the best thing I've seen all week.
Yeah, and so clearly they both love coffee, but they also loved horses. They didn't get to ride horses during that California trip because of the crazy weather, but they did get to ride horses together in the UK.
Yeah, and I really think that's where their bond first formed. When the president and Mrs. Reagan did go to Windsor in 1982, the Queen and Ronald Reagan, I see the picture there, rode horses. And what you don't see in that picture is right behind them was a horse-drawn carriage that brought Prince Philip and Mrs. Reagan following behind. He loved his time there with the Queen and so hoped he could return the favor at Rancho del Cielo. But as you said, the rain and the wind didn't permit it. But that was one of his favorite memories.
And it is wild to think, except for Lyndon Johnson, the Queen met with every president of the United States from Harry Truman to Joe Biden, and they all loved her. There isn't much that Donald Trump and Joe Biden agree on, but they both seem to really love the Queen. How do you think she pulled that off? Why is that?
Her English charm, her diplomatic skills, she was everyone, she's the Queen mom, she's everyone's grandmother, just a lovely, warm lady. And if, how can you not just be charmed by her? As President Reagan once said to her, our two countries share more than just a common language. A lot of our values, our beliefs, even how we run our government was formed on their soil. And so we have this common bond, the United States and, Great Britain. And I think all of the presidents of the United States see that. And again, she's just was one of the warmest people, and the stories I've heard about her are just lovely. And how could you not but fall in love with her?
And isn't it wild that our entire government was formed to get away from the British royal family, and yet the person that all of the presidents are most excited to meet is the Queen, right? It's like going back home to mom. I think there's some aspect of that for our country. Melissa, great stories. Thanks so much. Of course, you can check out more on the Queen if you go to visit the Reagan Library out in Simi Valley, and it's such a spectacular place to go. We will have more on the Queen still to come. But in honor of the Queen's visit to Santa Barbara, we go to break with the Above Los Angeles account taking us above Santa Barbara. We'll be back. More of The Issue Is right after this.
Now, across Texas, the issue is.
Our little show now has spin-offs. The Issue Is now has sister shows in Texas and Florida. On the Texas version, Rudy Koski spoke to Texas Governor Greg Abbott this week and asked him about California Governor Gavin Newsom's plan to expand electric vehicles.
California is outlawing combustion engine vehicles, new ones, the sale of them, by 2035. You've kind of gotten into a discussion with the governor over there. What's your reaction to that?
Well, if you keep up with the way technology is going, there's going to be so many alternatives that allow the internal combustion engine.
So it doesn't sound like he's joining in. We are grateful for the chance to expand our reach across the country, to hold leaders from both parties accountable. Of course, none of this expansion would be possible without the support and trust of you, our viewers. Up next here in California, a final tribute to the Queen. But we go to break showcasing her sense of humor. Here's a clip from the 2012 London Olympics when she was visited by Bond, James Bond.
Good evening, Mr. Bond.
Good evening, Your Majesty.
So this is PragerU.
Welcome.
Coming up in the next few weeks, we take you inside PragerU and speak to the folks behind it. This nonprofit based in the heart of liberal Los Angeles is churning out some of the most popular and influential conservative videos in the world. We end this week with a final salute to Queen Elizabeth II. On a weekend, we also mark the anniversary of 9/11 in this country. Right after that horrible attack, the Queen said something especially poignant. Quote, "Grief is the price we pay for love." The love for Her Majesty is obvious during the Queen's Jubilee in London earlier this year. Thanks for watching The Issue Is. Here is God Save the Queen.